I didn't want to have to say it again, but there's another AVRE in World of Tanks console, and of course, if you checked out yesterday's video, you already know, but this one is going to be featuring around what this tank is actually like in the game, and of course, some of the statistics, what you can purchase it for, etc. So yeah, let's get into it, because of course, Wargaming have released another AVRE after everyone hated the first one, which is really helpful. Either way, let's get into what this tank is all about and kick it off with how we set up this vehicle. But before we do the vehicle setup, let's have a look at what the tank can actually do in terms of its average damage. And so first things first, armor damage to about 760 alpha damage. So it is quite easily able to one-shot tier 5s. It is quite easily able to one-shot some tier 6s. Which is brilliant because this tank doesn't have to rely on having HE. It has HESH rounds, which mean that, well, you can deal damage regardless of whether you pen or not, which is once again one of my hates for having tanks like the AVRE in the game, is because it just basically means that people don't aim properly in the game. They never really learn how to use the aiming mentality, etc., and they just think that that's how it should be played, which is of course not the case if you've watched any of my videos, and it is how you end up with a lot less damage overall. And of course, yeah, having this sort of thing just lowers the kind of skill gap, and people will say that it's more beginner friendly, but it isn't really, because as soon as they play any other tank that isn't the same tank, they'll soon realize that, oh wait, how come I can't just deal damage every single time? They either then fire HE for some unknown reason, or decide that they're then going to quit the game or whatever. If that's even the case, that they purchased this thing in the first place and didn't just get one shot as a tier 5. But the FE3903, which is what you see it in game as, is of course the Churchill 7 hull with the kind of Churchill main turret and then a giant gun, which is 163mm for those of you that 165 even, so it's even bigger than that. And essentially this one relies on either having the premium ammunition to have higher penetration to reliably pen kind of thicker armor opponents, or having 120 pen with 760 alpha damage, of course having the higher alpha damage to be able to pen the lightly armored things, even though most tier 7s you can pen with the standard HESH rounds, and with 155mm of pen you can pen pretty much everything at tier 7. It's only in tier 8 and tier 9 games that you can play in that you'll struggle to pen things with either of the two rounds. So yeah, but don't worry, because you can still do 200 to 300 damage to them if you don't pen anyway. So it's one of those that it just purely relies on bouncing off of higher tier opponents to deal damage, even if you do have a very long reload time. And before you guys wonder like, oh, is this tank overpowered? This tank is absolutely not overpowered. It is not an overpowered tank. It is more of a broken tank. This is the difference that I want to make between having broken and overpowered. Broken is something like the FE4005 before it was nerfed. A tank that could one-shot everything, but in turn basically gets penned by absolutely everything and has a long reload and essentially can't really do a whole lot within the game. It is not particularly the greatest tank in the game either, but it can one-shot people, which is super infuriating for whoever you're playing up against, and often leads to people YOLOing in said tanks to be able to get one shot of damage and then doing absolutely nothing, getting taken out. And it's both boring for the player and also the player you're playing against, because yeah, it's not fun dealing one shot of damage and then getting taken out. So this is what this kind of tank really does in terms of its gameplay. It is very much a case of, if someone who is good that you're playing against finds out that you have fired, you'll get rinsed for all your hit points and then end up back in the garage a lot quicker. But obviously if you're playing against newer players, you can one-shot them, or you can hit them and then they don't punish you, and then you can hit them again, and that's kind of how the cycle repeats. It is a very boring tank to play. Yes, you can one-shot some people, but it doesn't feel all that rewarding because it isn't really rewarding, because, you know, how rewarding is it hitting a tank 2 tiers lower than you and one-shotting it? Yeah, not particularly that fun. And of course, you are super slow. This tank has a top speed of 27 kilometers an hour, but that's because we are using the traction system. But in fact, after playing the tank, I realized that there's literally no point, and I thought that this might be the case because, of course, traction system boosts your max speed and your chassis and hull rotation speed. Now, the real point in why I chose traction system was to get a better chassis and hull rotation speed, just so that you could turn a bit quicker and therefore be able to deal with anyone that tries to get around you, because you are a big, slow, heavy tank that is, yeah, relying on its gun and alpha to pen someone and to stop them from coming around. So yeah, that's why we went with traction system. But when we actually play the tank, I realized that it's still not really that much of a worth it, because the 8.6 power to weight ratio of this vehicle is one of the lowest that I've seen on any tank in the game, and therefore by increasing the top speed that you never reach, it doesn't actually do anything, and the chassis and hull rotation speed isn't a huge difference. So yeah, maybe it would be worth actually getting the advanced powertrain to boost up the horsepower, just so that you have a little bit more, but even then it might not still be worth it, and so maybe you'd want to go with something like advanced concealment or advanced optics. Maybe not advanced concealment, that's probably not the one to go for, but yeah, I would recommend maybe advanced optics as your kind of alternate layout. Otherwise, go for advanced powertrain, or if you really want, maybe even advanced reload, so you can swap between the two HESH rounds to guarantee yourselves more pens in the long run, when maybe you do find a tank that is on the borderline of being able to pen, but you just need that extra bit of penetration to secure that damage, and that's really where I think the advanced reload could come in quite useful on a tank like this. But of course, we're running full premium consumables. This tank would be horrific if you didn't have enhanced combat rations, since the reload of the vehicle is 17.78 seconds with all of the 9 commander perks available that boosts your damage and also your accuracy. That's kind of what we went for. We've got some camo ones in there, but that's primarily just because they're some of the better ones, just to reduce your still concealment, so you can remain undetected a little bit further out than normal. And then yeah, that's basically what we went for. Enhanced combat rations will boost up your damage per minute significantly, which is what you'll need having such a long reload. So yeah, that's kind of where we went. We had 28 of the standard and 12 of the premium. We basically standard fired mainly all standard, to be honest with you, because of the fact that, yeah, with 120 pen, providing you're fighting against tanks that are of the same tier or 1 tier higher and you're aiming for weak points, you can pen most of them. And even if you are fighting tier 9s, having 155 pen just isn't going to be able to cut it, so you may as well fire the standard and hope to get more splash damage than when you are firing the premium rounds. Premium rounds are primarily useful for fighting tier 8 vehicles. If they are any higher than that, then yeah, I would just recommend firing the standard rounds and hoping that you find the side or the rear of some tanks, like you may see in the replays coming up. But overall, I just wanted to talk about this tank because this is the sort of thing that I find very frustrating. It is not a brilliant tank, but they seem to be just introducing more and more of these high alpha damage tanks. And for a quick comparison, for example, we've had the FE 3903, we've had things at tier 10 like the Turan, for example, that are literally higher alpha than the majority of other tank destroyers at this tier. So for example, the Turan has an extra 100 damage over basically the Object 268 version 5 and the Object 268, which I have no idea why they did that, and has the same penetration values basically as them. So yeah, it is super fast as well, because you know it needs speed. And then of course you had the introduction of the Centurion AVRE, which was just another annoying tank. A tank that is a medium tank that has 185 pen with standard, 240 with premium, does 1100 damage if it pens you, and if they are firing HESH rounds and they pen you 1400 damage, and if they don't pen you with HESH they deal 400 to 500 damage regardless of whatever tank you're in. Even super heavies will be hit for 400 to 500 if they hit you, and that is the frontal armor, by the way, that's not the side. So yeah, just really fun. And then they slap spaced armor on it, so another tank. And then if that wasn't bad enough, what do we get as well as another season pass reward tank? Well, it wouldn't happen to be the Ruthless, which gets 1150 damage, or 1450 with Hesh and 1650 with HE. So another super high alpha damage tank that doesn't have to aim, because it gets either A, Hesh rounds, or B, it gets AP rounds with ridiculous penetration that will just pen you anyway. So another kind of borderline annoying tank to play. They may not be the most overpowered, except from maybe the Tyran, which is just genuinely OP, but these sort of high alpha damage tanks are just annoying, and that's why things like the AVRE got so much flack, because they are kind of boring to play, they're boring to come up against, and in general just a boring vehicle. So with that out of the way, I thought we needed to talk about it, because I don't want to come at it from an angle where this tank is overpowered and you guys go ahead and buy it thinking that it's going to be overpowered or anything, because it isn't. Trust me, this tank is not overpowered. It is just very boring and broken is what I would say, and I hate the fact that they introduce more of these into the game. And people make comparisons between this and the Dreadnought, for example, which is the Soviet version of the KV-2, and this tank has, of course, a 700 alpha, so slightly less than what you would see with the FE3903. But the fact is that this tank, if you do actually want to use it, you have to fire either AP rounds, which bounce, or heat rounds, essentially, which also bounce, so they do no damage if you don't pen, or you fire HE with really bad penetration that basically will only pen medium tanks, and therefore you're dealing, you know, 300 damage if you splash them. So slightly higher splash damage than you would see with the Churchill AVRE, but at the same time it is, you know, 86 penetration versus the 120 penetration, and most people will be firing the 250 heat pen of the Dreadnought anyway, so they'll just end up bouncing or just penning you. So that's kind of where the two differences are, and yeah, it's just annoying that this has two Hesh rounds that just deal damage regardless, and are just a very boring tank to play. Let's jump into the gameplay though, because that is where we get to see what this tank is all about. Now then, the first game that we do have is on Steps. This is a tier 9 game. This is what you can expect in some of your games. This is not the optimal setup in terms of you know, having the best game, I guess, or being able to reliably pen things, which is a good place to start, because sometimes you do not get the perfect matchup, and you will have to face opponents that, you know, do have over 120 millimeters of armor, or maybe they have much better kind of ability to evade some of your shots, some of the faster tanks and stuff like that. Because not only does this tank have low penetration in terms of being able to reliably pen things, but the shell velocity of these rounds, because they're Hesh, or essentially HE, with super high penetration or super high damage, that will end up with you basically having 500 and something shell velocity, which makes it worse than the majority of HE rounds in the game, which is god awful. And then of course, if you are firing the premium Hesh, it gets slightly higher at like 680, I want to say, something in that region, which is still worse than a lot of HE rounds in the game. So very slow rounds means you can't really hit people at range. It's got a really long travel time, so trying to snipe people like this M56, basically impossible unless you get super lucky or are very good at leading and have probably played a ton in this vehicle, which I'm sure there will be some people that absolutely rinse this tank for hundreds and if not thousands of games for some reason, but yeah, it definitely isn't the one that I would recommend. But of course, that is all down to your own interpretation. Maybe you'll really enjoy it. I feel like this tank could have a niche audience that enjoy the Hesh rounds and being able to kind of min-max the tank in terms of dealing lots of damage, but also being able to bounce rounds and stuff, because you can bounce rounds in this thing. It does have a little bit of armor, but it's not insane. And so yeah, it does have that anti-auto-aim armor, which means that when you angle with the tank, if people are just auto-aiming, which, let's be real, like 99% of people in this game do, rather than actually aim and deal damage, they will bounce off of you, because yeah, it's very good side armor sheeting that kind of stops those auto-aimers from being able to reliably go through you. Obviously, here you go, this is the shell velocity problem, there you go, missing completely, and we shot well in advance of when the guy was going to arrive in the position that we're hoping for. So, granted, this is like one of the first games that we played, and I'm sure we would get better at leading your shells, but at the same time, this is probably what the average experience of playing this tank is. A lot of misses from range and taking a long time to get into position. Now, I wanted to test out what the alpha damage would be like against something like a Tortoise, who obviously is enjoying his time playing around with his Tortoise, and there we go, easy as you like. Nice little 773 damage, and oh look how boring, an FE4303 who is behind us, who we can't turn around because this tank doesn't turn, and he manages to pen us. And then of course we're going for the shot on the Tortoise using the HE, and then we miss because you don't get that good gun depression of 12.5 degrees when you're firing over the front of the vehicle, and yeah, we didn't realise that until probably after that, where you get much better gun depression now when you do that. Tortoise has fired and he's about to fire again, and that allows us to go around the corner and finish him off. There you go. So, lost 1200 damage in our fight against an FE4303 and a Tortoise, and yeah, deal 797. Now, the game is going to continue, but that is kind of the engagements you can probably expect, and especially if you're newer to the game or someone that doesn't have that much experience, playing these sorts of tanks can be very difficult because you need to at least pen one tank in a game if you're going to have a decent game, and then you've got to find targets that you can reliably splash or be close enough to targets that you can actually deal damage. Here we go, a GW Panther, thinking he's funny being his little artillery, but I don't think so, Mr. GW, and there you go, you can go back to the garage, you little absolute thing of a player. But there you go, the GW Panther enters the garage once again, as I'm sure he's spent many a time in the garage after playing artillery. But there you go, the M56 manages to get taken out, and this game is pretty close, but if I was in any other tank I'd be very confident with being able to win this. There are only, what, 5 tanks on the enemy team, 2 of them are light tanks, which should be very easy to deal with if I was playing a medium, for example, and 2 tank destroyers who are spotted constantly throughout the game and haven't moved, which would indicate that they are maybe not the smartest of players or anyone that actually wants to commit to doing anything. So yeah, we are hoping that we can deal a bit of damage to them. So yeah, you're seeing here there is an IS. Hopefully we can hit this guy. We're going to have to wait to aim in because the aim time of this tank is horrendous. Of course it misses because yeah, 3.7 second aim time is horrendous, and therefore yeah, we had to go for it in case he did actually pull all the way down the ridge and we wouldn't have a shot at all. But here you go, IS is in the sights. Can we get a full one into him? No, we can't. 222 though for not actually hitting and penning. So yeah, that's what I mean about literally hitting tracks of vehicles and still doing 200 damage. So this is kind of where the game ends up being a bit rubbish because people keep pushing in to hold down tanks or tanks that are using ridge lines. Not the smartest of ideas, but you know, we all live and we learn, and hopefully people will learn. And then of course we only managed to deal 16 damage to the SMV because we hit the rock next to him. Yeah, you can splash for an inordinate amount of range when you play this tank. Now there are a TD and a heavy tank near me, and of course a tank destroyer in the base basically. But given the fact that there's 2 light tanks, they're probably going to be making their little old way over to where we are now, and so I don't want to get caught out in the open and finished off by them. So we start making our way over towards this location. Maybe they're going to come round, and there you go, a light tank appears out of nowhere. There we go. Hopefully we can get this guy out of the game. Not too sure if he's going to actually YOLO in and try and deal with some damage, but we may as well try and pre-aim where he's going to be. Looks like he's coming down. We're going to angle for the gun depression, and he comes around. We put one into him and 315 damage for not penning because we hit the tracks on the floor. So yeah, not because we didn't hit the tank, it was mainly because we didn't hit the actual body of the tank there that we didn't pen. So yeah, that's some 2,154 damage, but there's still a light tank and 2 tank destroyers left in this game. If I was in any other tank, at least we'd be able to move around and mobilize around the map. But we're not. We're in a super slow heavy tank that is not particularly very mobile. And here you go. Even trying to get shots can be a bit of an annoyance because of course you're quite slow to peek things, and you can often take shells that you wouldn't necessarily want to take. And the SMV is going to come down and try and take out our teammate in, of course, the heavy tank, which is the 257, I believe, off the top of my head from playing the game. But of course, oh no, 705 even. So now that we are now 1 versus 2, I'm hoping and kind of hoping that this charioteer, who's been sat on the other side of the map, not near anyone, will try and deal a bit of damage to these guys. And yeah, hopefully the charioteer will move up and support us. But we now have a light tank, as I was expecting, hence why we're turning around, because, you know, light tank trying to get around a slow heavy tank, probably going to be the case. But no, you can go back to the garage. But now we have the situation where we've got to either go into a bar or, of course, the tank that's going to be behind us, which is the SMV. And still, the charioteer has not yet pushed up. Thank you very much. I can definitely take on these guys. But instead of going around the cap circle, this is just a tip for you guys. If you ever are in this sort of situation where you're 1 versus 2, never drive through the cap circle, because then it alerts people as to where you're going to be. Maybe it was a play to somehow think that he's going to be in the cap and then they're going to go to the cap and then you could farm them, but I very much doubt it. But if you are going to drive around and want to be undetected, I highly recommend never driving through the cap circle if you don't want to know or let the enemies know where you are, and therefore you can stay a bit more covered and therefore, you know, play how you want to rather than your opponents getting intel on where you're going to be. The Grego here does end up losing the game, unfortunately, so yeah, a loss in this tank. But we still did 2,200 damage, so it can't be all too bad. It can be, but anyway, moving on. And our moving on ends up on Hellfire Pass, and this is of course the small version. Hellfire Pass is a weird map for this tank. This is a tier 7 matchup, so this is kind of what this tank is kind of made for, or at least is able to pen the majority of tanks that you come up against, and we'll see maybe a couple of full health pens in this game, but you never know. Either way, you're playing up against tier 5s as well. There are tier 5s in this game, which probably will hate you because you have double their hit points and can one-shot them. So yeah, just what you want when you're playing up against your tier 7 heavies. Either way, armor wise, works very well in tier 7 games if you use it properly, and often the armor actually works best when you're using your gun depression, which is good because you get the spaced armor that adds to the armor effectiveness of your side armor. So another good reason as to use your kind of angling technique to maintain the best gun depression. Sometimes you can overextend that, so you'll get penned through the side because you're kind of flat on when you're trying to go up a ridge or something, but for the most part it's not too bad anyway. But we're going to start making our way forward. We don't really want to stop anywhere because it's going to take us about 10 years to get anywhere in this game. So we'll push up either way and go for a blind fire on this guy anyway, because, you know, it's going to take us 15 seconds by the time we actually get there anyway. So no need to kind of wait around and wait for someone to open up, except for when an ARL gives us the side of his turret. And give us the side of his turret. He does. 606 damage. I bet that guy had a world of fun having been taken out within a minute and 45 seconds by the Churchill AVRE. Oh dear. This one is, it's definitely one of those that is super boring. And it doesn't even feel like fun when you pen things. Like when I penned that kind of AMX, it was kind of one of those things where you're like, oh yeah, I penned an AMX, cool. And then you move on with your game. So it's not like the KV2 where it kind of has that really RNG-ness and slow, but has that kind of strange kind of gun, and it relies on you getting a little bit lucky. This one is just a case of did I pen or didn't I? It's not even a case of getting lucky with this. It's just a little bit boring. And here you go, Mr. Tiger. Yep, 729. There you go. Another bit of damage in this game. Just waiting for the inevitable doom of when multiple tanks come at you at once and you're reloading for 20 seconds. But in this game, no such luck as of yet, but we're just kind of waiting for the opponents to make a misplay. Could have gone for a shot here, didn't, because I wasn't sure I wanted to waste my reload on that guy, because you never know, within the next couple of, or 18 seconds for the reload, we might have found someone else or need to take someone else out of this game. But yeah, it's a very slow gameplay tank. It's not a lot of kind of thrill seeking, rolling around, you know, dealing a lot of damage to people. It's more just a case of kind of occasionally you find someone that you can pen, and most of the time you don't, so you have to just fire at whoever you can to deal some damage. There you go, hit the mantlet of the Tiger 1 for 300. And now comes the long reload, and now it's a case of who do we want to shoot with this reload. And of course we're going to go for the tier 5, because we can pen that every day of the week, versus our friend in the Panther M10 or something, I believe it was, or maybe it was the VKM. Either way, that tank we can probably pen as well, but he is a bit of a slippery one and has been avoiding us this entire game. But there you go, 2,111 damage, and the artillery's looking. Something that we haven't talked about today is artillery, and of course this is a giant slab of hit points that the artillery will be loving to try and take out of the game. So you've got to be very careful when artillery are around, and of course if it's something like a Burt or something like a British artillery piece that has a ridiculous kind of arc on its rounds, then you can be removed very quickly. Now I got a little bit impatient here and decided that I would fire before we're fully aimed. Don't do that, it's not going to work in this tank. And so we end up missing and then taking a hit for our reward, when we could have one-shot this guy out of the game, or at least taken almost everything that he had. And so yeah, we're just waiting around. Maybe he'll make a misplay and we can get a bit more damage in this game, but it relies on this guy kind of giving us some. But yeah, not bad so far. And here you go, the Black Prince is around. We get hit from behind for about 200. Looked like a bit of a splash, but yeah, I'm not entirely sure what tank it is. I didn't bother looking, being very lazy in this game. So we decided, oh, we'll check out what it is. Maybe it'll be something interesting, something that we can snack on. And uh-oh, here we go. It's a, it's a Sturmpanzer firing heat, and we get AVRE. So yeah, fun. Oh dear. So when you give the frontal armor of this tank, it doesn't particularly have that much, and yeah, I don't even know where our turret ended up landing. Oh, right down the hill apparently. So yeah, we got AVRE from that one, and there you go, another derpy tank being able to take out the derpy tank. So yeah, my thoughts on this tank is you can have good games for sure. You can be pretty good. I don't think it's super competitive, but it is competitive. It's not going to be horrible to play. It's more about it being quite boring, and the kind of player, I guess, the play style of being basically sitting there waiting for a long time to then pump someone and kind of moving forward very slowly, and in some games just too slowly that you can actually get any damage at all, which did happen a couple times. Not that we got 0 damage, but just, you know, 1,000 or something like that. And some games you will just get rinsed in tier 9 matchups where everyone just pens you straight through and you can't deal any damage because you're in a tier 9 game and you're dealing 200 to 300 damage to people regardless of their armor, etc. So yeah, it can be a bit boring in those tier 9 matchups because you generally have to wait for kind of very lightly armoured vehicles like the Waffle Panzer 4 and the Waffle E100 sort of vehicles. Obviously can't meet the Waffle E100, but you get my drift when we talk about those sorts of tanks. So yeah, I don't like this tank. I don't like that they keep introducing the same tanks like that, but obviously given my reasons, you guys might have a completely different reason. Obviously I am only one player, you guys are tons of players, and it is down to your own opinion. And yeah, let me know in the comment section down below what you actually think about this tank. Obviously I don't think it's broken. Well, I think it's broken, but I don't think it's overpowered. Let me know what you think. Do you think it's too good? Do you think it's too bad? Do you think you would have changed it in any way? And if you would, let me know what you do. But other than that, that is the Churchill AVRE. Definitely a better tank than seeing the Centurion AVRE, but a tank that I didn't really want to see in the first place. So either way, I will see you in the next video tomorrow where we look at one of the free contract tanks, the KV4 KTTS, and that should be a little bit more enjoyable to actually try out and see a tank that is a little bit more useful and competitive Maybe not competitive, but you never know. Either way, I'll see you there. Have a great rest of the day, and I hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you there. Goodbye.